Today's episode is brought to you by MRC, a branding studio hailing out of Raleigh, North Carolina, where they focus on crafting killer design work for clients that love uber creative solutions for companies small and large. You can find and connect with them online at mrcraleigh.com. That's MRCRALEIGH, and at MRC Raleigh on Instagram. The good news is, if you find yourself reaching out, you'll most likely get to chat with yours truly. That's right, it's My Little Branding Co., and we're here to make your brand or idea look amazing. So let's connect.
Recorded at the Kitchen Studios. This is the Pencil Pushers Podcast.
Welcome, folks, to another episode of the Pencil Pushers Podcast. I am, of course, your humble host, Mike Rosado, and I'm so pumped to share my chat with one of the most impressive guests I've had on the podcast so far, the one and only Hayley Barry. Hayley is also one of the youngest guests I've ever interviewed and has amassed not only an impressive portfolio of illustration, lettering, mural, and signage work, but also has created a niche for teaching others her craft online. And just when I thought her story of hard work, determination, and pure talent was enough to win me over as an all-out fan, her openness to share her difficult and sometimes life-threatening challenges with cancer took me over the edge. I can't suggest this podcast enough for those who are looking for creative inspiration and pearls of wisdom in one little auditory package. Please do yourself a favor and visit her on Instagram at typeaffiliated and typeaffiliated.com as you sit back, relax, and enjoy our chat with Hayley. All right, everybody, we are here with Hayley Barry. Welcome to the podcast. I really appreciate you being here. How are you doing today?
I'm doing awesome. Thank you so much for having me on here today.
Absolutely. How's Provo doing? I'm not very familiar with the town, actually.
It's awesome. I love Provo. It's super dry and hot here right now. We haven't had a lot of rain, so trying to get some rain, but it's great.
Awesome. So tell me, how has it been? Now, you are, for those that don't really know that much about you, just as a reminder, this is a podcast that speaks to many different mediums in the hand-drawn art. So just for people that aren't very familiar with your work, maybe you can speak to a little bit about you as an artist. You're a sign painter, illustrator, hand letterer, educator. You do workshops. I mean, you're incredibly versatile in what you do. Where did this all start for you? I know you had some family members that were actually creative. Is that right? Is that kind of where the bug started?
Yeah, well, I've been drawing my whole life. I don't know what it was, but I just always loved it. So even when I was teeny tiny, I was always drawing, and I never even thought about doing anything else for a job. When I was super young, I just knew I was going to be an illustrator. And yeah, it totally helped. My grandpa on my mom's side, he was an illustrator. So I got to grow up watching him draw and work, and he was always drawing with me, and he'd just draw crazy things, would sit down and just try to think of the craziest things and would draw it. And then I also had an uncle on my dad's side who's a children's book illustrator, Guy Francis.
Oh,
and so he
really?
Yeah. So he also was really, super supportive. Always, me and my cousin Sammy, we would sit around and just draw all the time, And so I think it was useful for a couple reasons. I think a lot of kids grow up thinking of art as a fun thing, but not as a job. But even though neither of them specifically were like, Hayley, you need to be an artist, I think it helped seeing them working, right? So for me, art was never like this weird, like, ooh, artists like paint whenever they feel like, and they, just, you know what I mean? Like there's this kind of stereotype of like, ooh, artists just like wake up at noon and paint whenever they want and whatever. And I knew it wasn't like that because I saw them like get up and work.
Right.
And then, and I saw all the things that came with that, like the nights that have to stay up really late for deadlines or just all this different stuff. So for me, I think it was easy because I knew the art was a job and that it could be a job. And it's the job I wanted to do. And so my whole life I was just always drawing, and there was never really a question in my mind that I wasn't going to be an illustrator. I didn't know I would specifically be a lettering illustrator, but when I was in high school, I'd always loved it. I had been cutting out, I'm sure everybody does this, like I would rip stuff out of magazines that I liked, like illustrations or drawings, but a lot of times it was the lettering. I would cut out like the titles to things, and I was really interested in calligraphy. Like I would find these calligraphy things and I would keep them and just look at them a lot. I was very interested in it. But when I was in high school, I kind of started messing with it more, and I had a job working in an antique store. And one time my boss asked me to make a little sign for something that said 20% off. And so I drew it like, with cool letters. Instead of just writing it, I actually drew the letters. And I think I had like a little finger pointing at the letters, like to make it feel like it belonged in an antique store. And he said,
sure.
He was like, hey, I didn't know you did hand lettering. And in my mind, I was like, well, I mean, if you can draw people and illustrations, like why not draw letters? Like in my mind, it wasn't really a big transition.
Yeah, it's like all one big thing. Much, yeah.
But that's when I realized, like, oh, not everyone can draw letters. Not everybody really understands the letter relationships or how to add emotion to letters, and that's something I'm actually pretty good at. And I was, not to brag, I was good at the other stuff too, but it was something that I really liked. And so I kind of started studying it more, all on my own, trying to figure it out a little bit more, and that's kind of how I started getting into the lettering vein, specifically of illustration.
That's very interesting. It's making me think about 5 more questions now, to be honest.
Cool.
But I do want to go back to this idea, firstly, about the story that's been told by many people who aren't artists or don't know people who are working artists. This idea of being the starving artist, somebody who's not business savvy. And certainly that has been something that has been pervasive for many, many millennia, essentially. Yeah. Maybe not so much when it was known as a craft, but essentially, I think the tide has been turning. I think that as we see more, I think technology is certainly helping out with this, where you see technology giving us the ability to actually work from home, to go on Zoom calls, have client relations, and building that sort of like self-reliant ability as an entrepreneur, as a business person. That certainly seems to be the case for you too. Where do you see this? As basically, you're very young. You're like 22, 23. How old are you now?
Yeah, I'm 23 years old.
Okay, 23. You're probably the youngest person I've had on the podcast. Nice. So this is a really awesome perspective. Where do you see the idea of being an entrepreneur as a independent artist?
Yeah, well, I think it's really important, but I think it's something that a lot of people ignore. And I think it's also really interesting to note the fact that I do know a lot of starving artists. And as much as I wish I could say that wasn't true, I do. I know a lot of people who I went to school with, or people that are, pretty far along in their career. I say career in air quotes, but just who are not doing anything, right? And I think that it is hard, because the fact is, if you want to make it as an artist, especially if you want to do freelance, you have to understand a lot of that business stuff. And they don't teach you that at art school. I think a lot of people, they get into art because they love to draw, right? And you should love to draw, right? But it's going to be really hard to make money if you don't know how to charge for that work, or how to value your time, or communication. I know a few artists who are so awesome, as far as their work goes, but have zero communication skills, and it's really hard to get a client if you don't know how to talk to them, right? And so I think one big thing, I believe that there should be more business of art teaching in school. I know a lot of school just doesn't really teach that, right? You focus on drawing and drawing. I went to Utah Valley University, which was awesome, and I was in the illustration BFA program. And this one time, the guy who was the head of the whole program, he was like, we're doing a meeting for all the BFA people. So we go to this meeting, and we sit down in the big room or whatever, and he shows us these slides, and he's like, guess what the worst 3 majors are that you can go into as far as making money later? And it was anthropology, philosophy, and illustration. Illustration was the 3rd worst major.
Wow.
And then he gave us all these stats about how many people that graduate in illustration actually work in the industry, and it's terrible, so low. Yep. But then he followed it up with, so you guys all just need to draw better. And I just sat there and wanted to cover my face, because I was like, that is not the problem here. All these people know how to draw, they're super good at it. I'm like, the problem is they graduate from school with zero knowledge of how to get clients or any of that. And so I think really what it comes down to is you have to understand those things. And if they're not teaching you that in art school, you have to seek out mentors or people that are going to help teach you that stuff to get it figured out. And I think it is hard too, because a lot of artists don't want to do that, right? It's not why they got into art.
Yeah.
But then it's important to find a rep, or to find someone that's going to help you with that. And I don't think it's selling out either. A lot of people, I mean, especially when I go to like fine art events, you know, there's always the whole like, oh, you're an illustrator, like you sold out.
I was like that too.
Yeah.
I was like that too. Yeah.
You know, but it's like, but it's not, you know, making a living doing what you love is the dream, right? And so I think it's so weird when people like, oh, you get paid to do art, that's not real art. It's like, nope, that's what we want.
Yeah, I think that's been the pervasive idea for a long time. And I think the tides really are changing. As I said, technology, I think, is making a difference. I think the ability for graphic design to start infiltrating into the art world and vice versa is having a huge impact. I think the fact that mural art is becoming much more of a revered type of art, you know, because now we're getting people who are essentially a lot of street artists getting now calls from corporations, big business, to help them beautify their buildings and, you know, inside and outside. And it's making them think about not only is it an appreciation factor, which I think is a huge thing when people actually start to appreciate the artist and the art form itself. There's a respect that's involved there. And then the conversation about money and value starts to come into play. So I think this sort of like intersection of art and commerce, the way that it is right now at such a deep level and on so many levels, from small business to large business, I think is great for the art world as a whole. And I think that idea, the sort of like mental idea of, oh, you're not an artist if you're doing commercial work, I think that's starting to dissipate more and more when they start to see how pervasive it is in the business world itself, which I think is amazing. So
Totally.
I'm glad to see, actually I should say it's unfortunate to hear that even at your age, when you're probably fresh out of college at this time, is that right? Are you still in school?
Yeah,
or?
I graduated a year ago.
Okay, congratulations, first of all.
Thanks.
But it is pretty sad to see that even now that colleges are not doing a better job. I went to an art college, and I didn't realize how much that was missing from my education. Like, it's funny because when I went to art college, I had to get a minor in art history. That was a prerequisite. I had to have a minor. To me, I feel like they need to have a minor in business, like not art history. Yes, take some art history classes, and if you're passionate, do more.
Totally.
But I feel like you should have a minor in business, if particularly in the world that we're living in today.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting too because when I was in school, I took some business and marketing classes. And everybody, like my counselor, my teachers, like, why are you doing that? Those don't even apply to your major. And I'm like, but you're not going to teach it to me. Like, you know, like I need to know that stuff. And I was freelancing while I was in college. So I worked at a design studio while in college and was making enough doing freelance. On top of that, I was able to quit my job. So I was doing freelance like full time for about 2 years before I graduated, which was unique, you know, but
So you
again,
started like around 20?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I started straight out of high school, like doing crazy stuff, you know, and then it starts with like weird projects around town. And then, you know, you just get better and better and you get more like legit clients and stuff. But
Sure.
But because I was doing it though while I was in school, I was realizing like, hey, the things that I have questions about aren't so much on the drawing end, like, you know, which there were things there and it was super awesome to learn. I loved all those classes. But I was like, but how should I be doing my taxes? And how do I reach my target market better, you know, and stuff like that. So I took business and marketing classes and they were amazing. And that was also weird because my teachers in those classes would be like, so everyone here, you know, you're all business and marketing students. Is there anyone here that's not a business major? I'd raise my hand. They're like, what are you? I'm like, art and design. They're like, what the heck are you doing here? You know, but
It's like, I think you're in the wrong class,
yeah,
right?
but I was so glad I did it.
So was this just you know, your own personal drive, or were your parents kind of knocking down your door going, hey, you're going to be an artist, you better learn how to, you know, be business savvy too?
I think it was kind of my own thing. Again, I think just seeing other people doing it, I had seen a lot of people that were successful at it and I had seen people that weren't. And it seemed like the difference was the people that were just drawing alone in a room, doing really great work, but no one's seeing it and not doing real jobs for clients, and then people that were putting themselves out there and doing the business stuff along with the art, and those were the people that were succeeding. So I don't know, it was just kind of like, yeah, if I want to do this for my job, which I did, it's what I've always wanted to do, then I got to learn this stuff and I got to be good at it.
What do you find to be the toughest part of your job now that you are both the artist, which is basically the product and / service provider, as well as the business person? How do you strike that balance without driving yourself nuts? Is there something that you still find to be quite a challenge in striking that balance of being the worker and also the manager of your business?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, there's always going to be tricky things about it. Like, for one, not getting to draw as much sometimes is kind of a bummer. Like, when there's days where you have to spend the whole day doing invoices, yeah, you're raising your hand totally, and doing all the boring stuff that's not drawing, that's kind of lame. At the same time, though, it's nice because I hear people all the time who, maybe have a rep or don't run their own business, and they talk about like, oh, sometimes I get so burned out from drawing and then I just don't do anything. And I'm like, well, when I get burned out drawing, I just go, work on my email marketing list or whatever. Like, there's always some dumb, boring thing that doesn't require a lot of creativity you can work on. So in a way, it's good. So that's a challenge, of course, just doing that. Also, sometimes separating, I'm trying to figure out the best way to phrase this, like projects that you're excited about versus projects that are going to be financially helpful. You know what I mean?
Right, but maybe not quite so passionate about.
Yeah, like again, I'm at a point now I'm pretty picky about my clients. I'm kind of able to pick and choose, but still there's some times where you're like, oh, this client has a lot of money, but not really the most fun project, but it would be really helpful. And that's the other thing too, is it's like sometimes if you take a few of those clients that are less fun, but they have a huge budget, that's going to, make you financially independent so that you can work on other cheaper stuff just for the heck of it, So, I don't know.
How do you get to that point where you feel confident that you can say no to projects?
Well, I had a friend one time tell me this, and I was like, yeah, that is so spot on. So she said, if you are saying yes to more than 50% of the projects that come to you, then you're not charging enough. And I'm like, yeah. And so that's kind of the method I go for. Like, if I'm getting so many projects that I'm saying yes to, and I'm not really turning any away, then I'm like, okay, it's time to raise my prices, right? And so that's kind of the system I follow, is just like, if I'm getting busy, you got to raise your prices. And also, you just got to know what you're worth. I'm really hardcore into budgeting. I love budgeting. I love like financial planning and stuff. And it's like, yeah, I think a lot of people, when they're pricing, they just pull a number out of thin air. And it's like, no, you need to be figuring out exactly what you need to survive, what you need to be putting into savings, what you need to have savings in your business, what you need to cover all the costs of your business, what you need to have 6 months of income just put away so that if something ever happens, Corona, right? You want to have that thing, and then you need to price accordingly to all that. And I think when you think about it that way, it's easy to price confidently because it's not just some random number like, oh, am I worth this? It's like, yeah, this is what I'm worth. This is what I need, and this is what I'm worth, and how long projects are going to take, and all of that.
How did you find this past year for you, given all of those things you just mentioned? Were you prepared mentally, financially? How did you navigate those waters as an independent who knows that they're not getting steady income necessarily that they can rely on every month?
Yeah, well, I actually think it comes down to my parents. Like, as young as I can remember, every time I got any money, my mom, she told me, she was like, you put 10% into savings and you put 10% towards your tithing for the church. And I did, and like no matter what, even if it was like $1, I was taking that dime and putting it into savings. So I grew up saving, but I think it also helped. My family wasn't poor, like we never like didn't have food or anything, but we lived in a tiny house and we were a little bit scrappy, but I think that really helped because growing up I always saw like, okay, and I think too my parents were always very open about finances, so I knew like this is how much things cost. This is, you need to be smart with your money. You need to not get into debt. And so I just grew up kind of with that mentality of, yeah, like being financially independent is so important. And the second I graduated high school, like I moved out and was supporting myself totally. And again, it wasn't because my parents like didn't support me. It was just that I wanted to be financially independent. I loved the idea of taking care of myself. And so I worked the whole time I was in school. I did school with zero student debt because I paid for it as I went. I don't know. That was always really important to me. I believe that this is interesting too. So when I was in college, I had this roommate, really awesome person. She's one of my best friends, but we lived in the same place, like had the exact same expenses, and we also had the same job. We were both waitressing at the same restaurant. And so we had the same income and the same expenses, but I always had tons of extra money and was saving, and she was always calling her parents for more money because she was broke. And I thought it was so interesting because she was constantly stressed out and I was constantly fine, and the difference was how we managed the money. And so I always tell people, like, it doesn't matter how much money you're making, you are making enough as long as you know how to manage it properly.
Yeah, that was probably one of the toughest things that I had to learn as an artist, because I wasn't trained by my parents.
Yeah.
That was kind of a separate thing. The parents are dealing with the finances, and once it started to get towards the latter part of my teenage years, then they started to have those conversations with me. But I was already built in. It was already built in me to not have to think about that.
Yeah.
And so I think that really does make a huge difference to have that influence and transparency in talking about those things as early as possible, so that you can kind of have that independence like you have, so that you're way ahead of the game. I mean, just having you talk about this on the podcast today, I think is going to be really helpful. I would say not only to the young budding artists, but also just artists in general who are maybe just 35 years old, who are deciding to go off on their own, really starting to think about planning for the future, because before you know it, you're going to be 55, 60 years old and you haven't planned for savings, like particularly if you wanted to have that career for the rest of your life. How are you going to sustain yourself when you don't have that 401k that's been provided to you by the job you've worked for 25 years or something like that?
For sure.
Yeah, I think that's awesome. Thank you for talking about that. So let's talk about a little bit more about your craft. I mean, I really love your lettering style and your design aesthetic. How did you start to really get a good understanding of letter forms and how to structure them properly in a strong design layout? Where did that come from? Was that just you studying, like you said earlier, tearing out things in magazines, or did you start to develop more of a design education through your college years? Where did that come from?
Yeah, I think it's a combination of a lot of things. The very first thing I would say is just paying attention. I'm a big believer in just paying attention to the world, right? Because I think people see things all the time that they think are cool, right? You're scrolling through Instagram and you're like, oh, that's cool. Or you're driving down the street and you see something like, that's cool. But then you don't really think about it. And I think the biggest trick to getting good at being an artist is realizing how to look at things, especially in the case of letters. Because a lot of times we think like, oh, letters are all the same height or they're all the same width. But there's all these teeny tiny nuances that make them each special and unique. And so I think it's important when you see something that you like whether it's on packaging or whatever, instead of just being like, oh, that's cool, like really stop and look at it and say, okay, why is it cool? What's happening here that's making it so interesting to look at? So that's one big thing. But then also school, was super helpful. Being an illustration major, it's funny because I think a lot of people think of lettering kind of as a design thing. But when you're an illustration major, you learn about composition and you learn if I draw an arm 100%. Going this direction, it's going to bring the focus to the face or whatever. And it's like, even though letters, it's different than that, it's the same. You think like, ooh, if I do the crossbar of my T this direction, it's going to bring the focus back in towards, my main focus. Or if I use these colors, it's going to help this thing pop and people are going to look at this first because that's the most important thing. So yeah, I think school helped, but also just, paying attention and then tons and tons and tons of practice. Like nothing is a substitute for just drawing a whole bunch and figuring out those problems as you go.
Yeah. Are you, what's your general process to like, for example, there is, for everybody listening, I should, we'll obviously have this at the top of the episode too, but if you go to typeaffiliated.com, you can see a lot of her work there. There was one in particular that I really loved that I really loved. It's the magazine. It looked like magazine cover. It's The People of Provo. That's it, 2019. Beautiful work. How do you go about structuring, like, what is your process to structuring how you're going to do that for each individual design? Is it quick gestural sketches, like you're saying, where you get sort of like the form and the structure of how the layout is going to be? Is it free flowing? Is it more defined and refined? And how do you go about that?
Yeah, so for that project in particular, the first thing that was important to me was to figure out visually how to portray each of those people. So that was what was so fun about the project, is you might not realize it, but like there is definitely a style of lettering that matches your personality.
Oh, totally, yeah.
Mm-hmm. And so figuring out like with each of those people, like, Brittany Jepson, she needs something that's definitely like scripty and very flowy, where Corey Fox needs something kind of edgy and cool, like figuring all that out. But then as far as the process goes, generally with those, what I would do is first I would figure out the main name, right? Which is just hierarchy. You want to make sure the most important elements are going to be the ones you spend the most time on. So I would very first establish like what style do I want the name in, that's going to be the most important thing. And then I would go through, and I did that whole project on my iPad. And so that one was all done digitally. But then I would just go in with like a pencil on the iPad and just, first I would lay out all the phrases. So I interviewed all these people, got all this information about them.
Okay.
I would go through and find the parts that I thought were the most important, and I would add those first, and just say like, okay, I'm going to put one here, maybe one down in the bottom corner so it's balanced, and then just kind of fill it in. And that's the really cool thing about lettering is a lot of it is about the letters themselves, but then it's also about the negative space. What are you going to do with the negative space? How are you going to fill it up? How are you going to make things feel together? And so I think, pretty basic, just like doing sketches, moving things around till you like the sketch, and then going in and fleshing out those letters and making sure they look nice.
And generally speaking, do you find that when you're working with clients that are asking for these kinds of projects, do they understand the financial value that you're asking for when you're going for these projects? Because a lot of times, especially for, let's say, print clients, people who have like publications and stuff, they are really working within a tiny budget because they're very, it's the margins are fairly slim a lot of times, especially with print work today. How do you strike that balance of being able to work on these projects that you find probably creatively fulfilling, but they don't have the budget necessarily to handle maybe what your price normally would be?
I just don't do them. Honestly, I don't do people that can't afford my prices. Because the thing is, here's the deal, right? There's people that are going to value your work and are going to pay you what you're worth. And if you take those jobs, then you can afford to do your own passion projects on the side and make what you want.
Yeah.
But also have 100% creative control. I don't work for people that can't afford the prices. Like, if I send you a price and you're like, that's too low, I say, thank you so much, have a great day. And that's just me. And I know not everyone's like that. Like, some people do. They take jobs for nonprofits or for other things. I don't do that. I feel like that's just not for me. For paid clients, they're going to pay for full.
Was that the case for even when you were starting out, just trying to get your name out there? Because obviously, there's the idea of getting that, I want my portfolio to look really good and so that I can show them that I can do this work. I mean, obviously you had to probably work towards that, correct?
Yeah. I mean, of course my prices have gone up, but I've never worked for free. Working for free is something I've always been pretty opposed to. But the times that I have worked for free, I guess this is my philosophy. Never work for free unless it's totally on your own terms. So a good example of that, in 2017, I had already had experience doing sign painting and obviously a lot of lettering, but I wanted to do a mural. I was like, I think it would be cool to do a mural, and if I can paint signs, I can paint a mural, right? So I wanted to do one, but I wanted to do one in a place where it was going to make an impact and be something that would be awesome in a portfolio, right? So rather than just going and painting one outside in my yard or something, I wanted to do one in a cool spot. But I also, I was like, but how am I going to convince someone to pay me to do this because I've never done it? And so what I did is I got on Instagram and I did a post that said, win a wall. and I said, hey, I'm going to paint one free mural for a lucky business in Utah. So if you'd like the mural, you have to go and fill out this form and apply. And I'm going to pick the best one and you're going to get a free mural. And I had tons of people apply.
Clever.
I didn't really know what was going to happen. I was like, is anyone even going to want to do this? Because I have zero experience painting murals. But tons and tons of people did. And it was actually really funny because doing it that way...
How old did you say you were?
I was, let's see, I would have been 19 when that happened. But because I did it that way, like, I was holding all the cards, right? It wasn't this whole, like, hey, do this for me for free and do this. Like, I had total control. So I actually, like, interviewed each of the businesses and was like, what's your plan for this? Like, what would you like? You know, and then I was able to pick the one that was the best fit. And because I did it that way, too, like, I made a contract that was like, okay, like, you know, based on what you told me, I'm going to create a mural, no revisions, no whatever. I show up and paint it for free. And so then I was able to do one for Waffle Love, which is an awesome business here in Utah, and was able to go in there, paint it, take a lot of pictures. I did it for free, but as soon as I had done that project, I got tons of other mural projects coming in. And so I think there is a time to do work for free, but again, make sure you're doing it on your own terms. And again, there's always places too to find opportunities. Like I wanted to do more packaging design. I was like, hey, I'm not really getting a lot of packaging jobs. I think it would be cool to do that. And so last October, I did a series where every day in October, just as my own personal project, I designed a different label and designed them to look like Halloween themed things. So it was like, you know, like a spider potion or whatever, but they were all these goofy labels. But I did it as a personal project for me. That way I had control, right? I could do whatever I wanted. But I was putting it out into the world like, hey, look, I design really cool labels. And sure enough, like as soon as I had done that, I started getting asked to design packaging. So I think, too, it's like whatever jobs you want to be doing, don't just wait around for someone to hire you to do them, right? Figure out a way to get people to hire you to do them.
Hayley, I hope you take this as the best compliment possible, but you are a badass. This is so cool.
Thanks.
Let me get to a couple other questions here. So let's talk about the future for you too, and then I want to backtrack on some past things too, if we can. You know, you are independent right now. Do you find that sometime in the future that you might add people to the team, or what does that look like?
Totally. Actually, that's why I named my business Type Affiliated instead of like Hayley Barry Design or something, because I would really like to expand eventually. I love doing the creative end of things, but like drawing stuff with the pen tool, right? Not my favorite, right? There's certain parts of it I'm like, I don't want to do that, or even like answering all the emails. So eventually I would love to get a studio space, you know, somewhere, and to hire on a few other designers.
Oh, you basically working from home at this point?
I have my own little home studio, but I would love to get a separate place. Not a home, bigger spot.
It's huge. Trust me, I was there, and it's a game changer when you finally get there.
Mm-hmm. And then I'd like to hire on a few other people. I also think it would be really cool someday to start a co-working space, you know, so like a place where other freelancers could come work, because personally I'm an extrovert. That was the hardest thing about going freelance for me, was working by myself. I hate doing that. Like anytime I can go meet a client in person, I'm like, great, let's do it. Like I'll meet you anywhere. How far do you want me to drive? Like I'll be there, you know, just because that's more my style. But I think there's a lot of other freelancers like that too, that are just kind of lonely a little bit. So I think it would be really cool to eventually buy a commercial space to rent out to other artists, so that you can still have your own freelance business, be in control of your hours and all of that, but have coworkers, right? And help each other. Like maybe get like a photographer or a web designer, like a few different people. So they're not your employees, but they're like a wonderful, wonderful networking group, I guess. Yeah. That's a goal eventually.
That was a game changer for me actually a few years ago when we moved into a space with a couple of other creatives. We have an office called the Kitchen. And my design studio is called MRC, but we have a space called the Kitchen, and we deal a lot with the food and beverage industry.
Oh, cool.
But that really was a game changer, because it sort of reminds me of when I was in art college, where you had photographers, illustrators, painters, fashion designers, all commingling together, even, in dorm rooms, but also just in classes, foundational classes. And, we'd meet at coffee shops and we'd become friends, and the collaborative component. And I was just talking to, I had another podcast interview yesterday with Jordan Kay, and, we were talking about how important it is to have that collaborative element for us, not only for providing external inspiration, but also getting feedback and seeing things from different perspectives, especially as small team entrepreneurs, where you can, sort of pull resources and learn, how did you deal with this problem here, right? Not only from a creative standpoint, but from a business perspective too. But also sharing clients, and it's all. There's nothing but a benefit that I see in those kinds of scenarios.
Totally.
So that's cool. We'll have to look out as you keep expanding your horizons there. I did want to talk about. We mentioned this earlier before the podcast. I was reading an article. I think it was in perhaps an article for UVA. I think it might have been.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah, and apparently at 14 years old, you were diagnosed with cancer. How did that affect your outlook on life and your career? And clearly you're very driven, and I wonder if part of that is tied to that incident, which I think is perhaps something you're still sort of working with right now, right?
Yeah, so that is quite the story. So when I was a freshman in high school, I got diagnosed with Hodgkin's lymphoma, which is a type of cancer, and it was in my neck. I just had a huge bump on my neck. Was like, whoa, what the heck is that? Like, wasn't sick or anything, but you go check it out, and it was cancer. So long story short, I'll give you like the super fast version. So 14, got cancer, did chemo, radiation, all the things, right, for about 6 months, and then it was gone. And then I was good for 2 years, and then I got another bump on the other side of my neck and had to do chemo, radiation, all the things, which was worse the second time, and then it was gone for about 2.5 years. And then I was living in Alabama. I was serving a mission out there for my church, and I got another one, so I had to move back home. And just until this last March, I was doing treatment. So for like 3 years, I was doing treatment nonstop, which is funny because people didn't even know. Like, as far as having cancer goes, I've been able to handle it really, really well. I'm surprisingly healthy and stuff, and was able to get a lot done. And so people don't even know most of the time. Like when I'm like, oh well, I just had to go in for a CT scan and my cancer's looking pretty good. People are like, what? Like, what are you talking about?
Wow.
But it is a hard thing, and I do think it affected stuff. And I think there's a few lessons, like if I could really break it down. And the first is I think I learned pretty early on, like, not to give a crap about, like, stuff people usually worry about. So I think, in a way, I was really lucky, right? Not to say I was lucky to have cancer as a teenager, because totally that sucks. But I think I had friends who, it was very interesting. I got to watch my friends go through all the regular stuff teenagers go through, right? Like, worrying about being cool, or worrying about, if this guy likes them, or worrying about how they look, right? But I'm this bald kid walking around high school, right? And so it was like, I think I realized really quick, like, oh, none of that stuff really matters, right? Like, you can look like an alien and nobody cares, right? Everyone's still nice. And two, just that there's important stuff in life and there's stuff that's not, and I think that was really kind of useful to realize, like, it doesn't really matter what people think. Like, you should just do the things that are important. So that was a lesson. But also, I think another big one, actually, and I might get a little sad here, but when I was 16, so the second time around when I got cancer, I did a whole bunch of treatments and stuff, and it didn't work. And there was a little bit of time where I was pretty sure I was going to die, because they told me, like, hey, if you don't do any other treatment, like, this thing's just going to keep growing and you're going to be in a lot of trouble. And I was like, okay, that's fine. I'm done doing treatment. I'm done with this. Like, this sucks. I don't want to live my life this way. So I thought I was going to die. But it was really interesting because, like, when you hear stories about people who are about to die, a lot of times they, like, go out and do all this stuff that they always wanted to do and that they never had a chance to do. And as I was thinking about that, I was like, well, what do I want to do? And I was like, I've already done everything I want to do. Like, and like, again, not to be cheesy or anything, but like, I think you need to live your life in a way that you do the things that you want to do, and you spend your time doing the things that are important to you. And yeah, you don't worry about stuff that's not important. And I think if you do that, then when the day comes where you say, oh, hey, maybe I'm going to die any day now, you're not full of regrets. And I think that was kind of a big help to realize, like, hey, I'm okay. Like, I'm doing everything that I love, right? I'm spending time with people I love, and I'm spending time doing the things that are important to me. And so I think I still do that now, because, again, like, I'm not dying anytime soon. I'm fine. But still, I've had to live my life wondering if I will live to be very old or anything like that. And so I think I've never really had time to say, like, oh, I'll do that later. I think a lot of people have ideas for projects and stuff, and they're like, oh, I'm going to do that someday. Like, and for me, it's kind of been like, oh, I'm going to do that right now. Anytime I have an idea for something. And so I do think that's a big help. But I think also that, I have a hard time. Sometimes people are like, oh, cancer made you the way you are. And I'm like, no, I kind of think I'm the way I am, and that helped me get through cancer for sure. But yeah, it does. I mean, it is a good teacher, and it teaches you the things that matter and the things that don't. And it's still something that I'm dealing with, like, even though I'm technically cancer-free since this March, right now I have to decide whether or not I'm going to do a bone marrow transplant, which is something I've been thinking about for a few months, and that's hard. It's a really hard choice to have to try to make. But again, if you're doing the things that you love, and you're living your life in a way that is right, if you're honest, if you're good to people, then those things are a little easier to deal with because you know it's going to be okay. And two, and I have to say this as well, like, I know not everybody's religious, but I think believing in God is such a huge part of it too, right? And knowing that there's more than just this life, and there's more than just all the little stupid problems that we have now. And so doing the things that are important to you and making the most out of that is really important.
Wow, that's amazing. Thank you so much for sharing that story. You are so impressive. I am so glad that I asked you to come on the podcast. You are killing it, and I can't wait to see what you're going to do next. On that note, as we close this out, I'd love to know what you're working on now that you're really excited about. Yeah,
well, there's always something, right? I've been doing a little personal project just for fun, where every month I've been designing and screen printing a new t-shirt, which that's just been really fun. Anytime you're learning how to do something new, learning how to screen print at home has been awesome. As far as client stuff goes, doing some stuff for HGTV right now, which is pretty cool. Really excited about that. That probably won't be out for a long time, but that'll be cool when it is. I'm doing a logo for an antique store in San Francisco, which that's totally, anytime you can work with an antique store, I'm like, the best clients are antique stores. I'm like, that's it. That's the dream. So, I don't know, cool. just fun stuff.
Nice. So, where can people find you as we close this episode out?
Yeah, so the best place to find me, my website is typeaffiliated.com. On Instagram, it's typeaffiliated. And my email is typeaffiliated@gmail.com. And if people have questions about lettering, about anything, please let me know. I love, talking to people and helping out any way I can.
Awesome. That sounds great. Hayley, it's been a true pleasure. I know you're getting ready to head to the workshop next, and hope you have a great class. And let's do this again sometime, okay?
Yeah, totally. Thank you so much for having me on here. It's been great.
It's been a pleasure. All right, you take care.
Yeah, you too.
All right, bye-bye.
All right, everybody. Thank you so much for listening to the Pencil Pushers Podcast. Follow us on Instagram at the Pencil Pushers Podcast for visual representation of our guest artwork, topics discussed, and anything else that contributes to the show. So be sure to subscribe. Tell a friend. Tell lots and lots of friends. Become a leadhead. And we're out.